Welcome back to another revision access video. Today we are finally kickstarting our Stuarts history course and we're looking at James as the King of England. Now in this video we're going to be looking at some key areas. What did James inherit when he took over as king, James I, and his policies as king and his religious policies, James's books and message behind them, as he did have a few of those. So we're going to see some active recall again. I did do this earlier, so pause the video, get a piece of paper and make sure to see what you can remember on this video if you want to do and see what you can remember from this particular topic. So pause it and come back to here. So hopefully you've looked at that and hopefully you've done some active recall as we look at my active recall and see what I did. So James inherits £400,000 in debt from Elizabeth. This is a key bit of info to know when we look into James's finance later on in another video. Is we've got to look at the pros and cons of this Elizabeth debt and if James can get rid of it. Obviously he looks at his extravagance throughout this in the future, and it's obviously very important. This is one of the key areas James perhaps doesn't do as well in. He's quite a successful king. What he doesn't do as well in is the finance because of his extravagance, you know, giving all these gifts to people he likes like Buckingham. It's obviously a major area for concern when we're looking at James inheriting this £400,000 in debt. I think he would have created debt anyway, but it's a key area to know what he inherits from Elizabeth and Elizabeth's legacy. Now, also to know, when he comes in, he makes peace with Ireland and Spain relatively quickly. That's also a keynote to see about James's policy, is that he already wants to make peace, so that is also a very key note to make. Now it's probably good to look at his aroma, his figure, how he was not a heroic king. He was not even as impressive as Elizabeth, who may be seen as a woman at the time. People would have frowned upon that, but James was even more frowned upon. He was seen as ugly and small, which gave people even less confidence, adding to him being Scottish, not an English king, but Scottish and England have like a turbulent relationship. It wasn't a very good look, but James was smart, he was clever, and it's also really good to know that he had a good education, making him very equipped to be king and to handle religious problems as he has studied the Bible. So it's really important to know that despite not looking like a king, his intelligence makes him a king. So that's probably why it's really important to know that. Now, you've got to pick up on the divine right of kings. It's a relatively easy topic. The divine right of kings is the belief that God appoints all kings, and breaking away the king or removing the king is fighting against God. So he's put in there by God, and it's a religious hierarchy that has been put in there. So James obviously firmly believed in that, but there's many people in Parliament and many people who don't believe in that. So it's really important to link that in, because the divine right of kings actually becomes one of his major problems early on here. So looking at some other stuff now, James uses his religion and his smartness and his intelligence really to put it all in books. He was an author. He wrote some witch stuff. The only thing he was truly scared of at the time was actually black magic. So looking at this, the true law of the three monarchs was one of James' testaments of what a true king should be, as it says here. And this is a key quote. If you've got like a quote book, I would have a quote book if you want that to add into your essays. Is the state of the monarchy is a supreme thing on earth. As to dispute what God may do is blasphemy, so it is therefore insubject to dispute what a king may do. This is another clear area to look at. Obviously James doesn't want, he's made like this whole author book, and he wants the divine right of kings to be upheld. So when Parliament sort of fight against him early on about this, and I think they try to give him like sort of this message that never gets to him, but he finds out anyway they're going to give to Elizabeth, saying how he denounced all these things. James obviously comes back with the divine right of kings multiple times. So I would really look at this as a true figure of what James is about and how James balances stuff up, because he does believe in the divine right of kings a lot. So it's really, really good to link that back, and that is a very key quote I would use there. Now, he also used the Basilican Doran, and this is like James teaching to his son Henry, who after his death then becomes Charles, and it just tells them of what a king should be, because he wants to make like a bloodline of like the Tudors before they died out that are just as good as kings. And obviously, we know the future. You're probably looking at this if you're trying to revise for history, is that Charles obviously does not do a good job during the 2 civil wars. But looking at this, in the first chapter, it speaks of the king's religious duty, how he's got to pray, how he's got to do all these different things, and make sure he upholds the divine right of kings. Now, Charles does this quite effectively. I know I'm linking Charles, don't really need to link to him now, but we're just seeing James's like true learnings. So yeah, but the second chapter speaks of being a good king, fulfilling responsibilities, visit all the kingdoms, go to war with old but good leaders. He was very insistent that they have to be old and like basically experienced leaders, but they have to be good leaders. They can't be like manipulative or treasonous. So maybe that's why he didn't do well in the Civil War, because royalists did tend to be like that. But he also wanted young and agile soldiers who are more likely to put up a better fight than old soldiers. And one of the key things he wanted was a good wife with the same religion. Obviously that is the opposite of Charles' wife, as Henrietta Maria was Catholic. So Charles does usually use this Basilican Doran later on, and it's good to link it back to that. But maybe look at this even further and see like James. This is what James really thinks of being a king. That's what we're really looking at. When he comes into king, we want to see what kind of king he really is. So this is what we're looking at here. Now, the third chapter focuses on daily values and life of a king, and I think that James is quite hypocritical here. Maybe you can balance it up if you look at his extravagance and his finance. James isn't what a king's going to be. He's not saving like Elizabeth did. He's not balancing his checks like Elizabeth did. He's really putting all of his eggs in one basket there, and maybe trying to tell Charles to even be a better king than himself. So it's also important to link that together. So the main outcome that comes from the Basilican Doran is that he criticised Puritans and Roman Catholics that kept the middle way. Now this is a major area, and a major area you've got to take from this video is that Puritans and Roman Catholics really were excited for James. They really wanted him to be different to Elizabeth, and keeping the middle way was really angering them, because the middle way had its ups and downs and was slowly like fading away towards the end of Elizabeth's reign. More rebellions and stuff after the Spanish Armada really meant maybe it wasn't working, but James wanted to keep it, and we know that he is a very successful leader. This is what James wants to be. He wants to be a peaceful sort of king that we will see in the future with his foreign policy. And obviously when he makes peace with Ireland and Spain, as seen here, it's amazing to see, because we get to see what James is really like as a king through this book, and you can make very assumptions about it. You might have a question on what was like James like as an early king, how was he affected by the extravagant stuff like that. So in your do you do 10 markers? In your 20 markers or your 30 markers, you'll probably look at this as one of the sections just as background knowledge when you're asked about foreign policy, religious policy, or financial policy. Now, key things to just consider in this is that, remember the main points behind James, as I was saying, to later reference throughout his reign, and also linked to Charles' reign and policy. Because Charles really looks to the Basilican Doran as a key entry point to what he wants to do with the divine right of kings. Yeah, so the divine right of kings becomes increasingly more important. Really important to note that down, and you should also understand the main outcome of James being the author of the books. So these are all major things to consider. So make sure to write down some notes from these 2 key slides. I think this is like really important for the whole James scenario. You've got to have this in there. It's not a big topic, the James area, nowhere near as big as the Charles one, but you've got to do that. So yeah, any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll try and answer as many as you can. Obviously I'm an A-level student like you, studying them this year. I will be hoping to achieve good grades based on these, and hopefully I'm giving you some good advice.